winner of the Nitro Girl Search in 1999, WWE Babe of the Year in 2004. Ladies, gentlemen, my non-binary friends, it is I, Josh Robinson, here for Love Wrestling, and today it's the legacy of Stacy Keibler. At just 18 years old, Stacy Keibler was a cheerleader for the Baltimore Ravens football team. Now, Keibler didn't begin watching wrestling until her boyfriend, Chris Cumberland, would introduce her to it in 1997. Stacy Keibler can be seen in the crowd on an episode of Nitro in 1997 and at the Starrcade 1998 pay-per-view before the television championship match, dancing in an NWO Wolfpack t-shirt. In September 1999, Keibler would enter a nationwide contest held by World Championship Wrestling to find a new member of the Nitro Girls dance troupe. Now, of course, the Nitro Girls was WCW's way of entering into a commercial break or going into hour 2. They'd bring out the Nitro Girls to kind of give it a bit of a different vibe, give it more of a sports vibe that WWF at the time was not really offering. After a series of polls on WCW's website, it was down to just 8 women going for this one spot in the Nitro Girls troupe. Now, on November 8th, 1999, on an edition of Nitro, Stacy Keibler would be declared the winner, and her winning dance routine was watched by 4.4 million viewers. Now, if you think any wrestling is getting 4.4 million viewers in this day and age, you are wrong, and this was something that wasn't even wrestling. She would also score $10,000 in prize money, and should become a part of the WCW flagship Monday Nitro Girls under the name Sky. Now, by 2000, Stacy Keibler was appearing on WCW as a Nitro Girl, attending school full-time and cheering for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, like some Nitro Girls in WCW, Stacy Keibler would soon accept a larger role and become a heel valet using the stage name Miss Hancock, I should say. Now, some weeks it would spell Hancock, and some week it was spelled Hancock with a D. I know, it's very weird. Now, she would serve as an associate for the tag team of Lenny Lamb and Ludi, and of course, doing other different things. Now, her main kind of staple in WCW was wearing business suits. Her character was known to climb to the top of announce tables and dance vibrantly, I guess you could say. It would become a staple for Keibler over the years, but Miss Hancock would enter the ring, and her long legs, which she was may become her trademark in professional wrestling, she would get into the ring and pause briefly. So members of the audience, how can I say this in a nice way, would see up her skirt. I know it sounds very weird, but again, we're in the late 90s. It was a very different time. I think I've talked about it on this show many times. It was just different, alright? It was just a different time. Women were used as eye candy. Stacy Keibler, Miss Hancock in WCW, was the ultimate form of eye candy. She was not a wrestler. She never claimed to be a wrestler. She was a dancer. She was a cheerleader. She was simply just, she was a sex symbol. And that's what worked for her in the late 90s going into the WCW 2000 era, which I'd love to do a legacy of, side note, on WCW 2000, stay tuned. But she would become that kind of thing during WCW's time. Now, of course, she dated David Flair, both on and off screen. They're involved in an interesting storyline with Daphne. Now, Miss Hancock set her eyes on Flair and ended up stealing him away from Daphne and continued to torment the woman who she stole her boyfriend from. I know, it was a very weird feud, and it was a very interesting time. Now, while I say Miss Hancock was not a trained professional wrestler, of course, she actually did wrestle in WCW. Her in-ring debut would come at Bash at the Beach in a wedding gown match, which she lost after she removed her own gown. I'm not trying to sound as sarcastic as I'm sounding, but it's with the right intentions. We're going to get to the good stuff here. WCW 2000 was a very interesting time, and I'm going to talk about more of what kind of is interesting during the next thing that I talk about. Hang hang tight. I think when it comes to Miss Hancock in WCW, one of the most infamous things that ever happened was at the New Blood Rising event in 2000. Now, Keibler and Flair began a feud with the Misfits in Action Stable. Now, this would happen at New Blood Rising against Major Guns in a mud wrestling match. During the match, Major Guns kicked Stacy Keibler in the stomach, and she revealed herself the next night on Nitro to be pregnant. It was interesting. She eventually revealed that the pregnancy was false, broke up with David Flair, and was taken off television. Now, there was a lot of hoopla going around this very angle, and New Blood Rising is a infamous wrestling pay-per-view in itself, considered to be one of the worst pay-per-views in wrestling history. One of my personal favorites, because it's just absolutely insane. Now, Keibler was taken off of television in WCW. She actually did return in WCW in 2001. She would actually be Stacy Keibler in the very latter part of 2001's WCW run. Of course, WCW was then bought by Vincent Kennedy McMahon, so of course, WCW Nitro was no more. But in the very later stages of Stacy Keibler's run in WCW, she was actually Stacy Keibler. She was with Shawn Stasiak. She was a heel manager, and she just kind of did her thing as they were feuding with Bam Bam Bigelow. WCW was purchased by the World Wrestling Federation in 2001. Stacy Keibler's Time Warner contract was bought by the WWF, so Stacy would actually make her WWF television debut on June 14th, 2001 on an episode of SmackDown. Kind of Stephanie McMahon brought her to the ring to distract the Rhino, and it caused him to lose a match, and that was how she was brought into WWE, and then eventually would have joined the infamous Alliance. I feel like I'm going to say the word infamous a lot in this when it comes to talking about Stacy Keibler. She was paired with Tori Wilson, and they were the kind of WCW girls that would come over. Now, both her and Tori Wilson were not wrestlers. They were training to be wrestlers. They were in a feud with, I guess, the quintessential WWE girls at the time in 2001, Trish Stratus and Lita. Now, this would lead to the first ever tag team bra and panties match at the infamous Invasion pay-per-view in 2001. Trish and Lita would win, and it was just kind of like that for a little while during, everyone knows, the Invasion era. Everyone knows the Alliance time wasn't the kind of greatest thing in the world, but Tori would go and do her thing, Stacy would go do her thing, and that kind of really faded really fast within the women at the time. Now, of course, women at the time in 2001, it was just before the women were starting to wrestle a little bit more. So we're in a very different time. I was just talking, of course, about a tag team bra and panties match. So you could imagine the time that we're in this time during the Invasion. Now, I think we all know that when you seen the episode of This Legacy of with Stacy Keibler, it was going to be a little bit different, because while Stacy did wrestle during her time in wrestling, she was definitely more of a personality, definitely more of a valet. And we're speaking of great valets in the WWF, or just pro wrestling in general, we have to talk about Stacy's time as the Duchess of Dudleyville, of course being the manager of the Dudley Boys, Devon and Bubba Ray. She was kind of an interesting part. Now, while this didn't last all that long with the Dudleys, she would actually serve a pretty cool part in the Dudleys kind of vibe, because remember, this was the time that the TLC matches were coming to an end. We were kind of getting past the Hardys and the Edge and Christian and the Dudleys always wrestling one another. While it still happened in 2001, to the latter stages of 2001, that wasn't happening when the Duchess of Dudleyville was coming into WWF, and again, she was just a different element that added to the Dudley Boys. And I think it shows that in wrestling, you don't have to be a wrestler to be an interesting part of a wrestling program. I think that Keibler was always somebody that, again, was not a wrestler, and I think anytime that she was wrestling, while it had moments of coolness and had moments of differentness, we all knew that Stacy Keibler's greatest strength was being something else. And in this time, and what thrived in wrestling in this time, was being eye candy and was being a sex symbol. And a lot of people would look at that with disdain. I see the value in that, and I don't think it fits, to a certain degree it doesn't fit within the world we live in now, but in the time it did what it needed to do, and Stacy did it really well. Now, after the Duchess of Dudleyville and kind of doing some things on SmackDown, I think we all remember what happened with Vince McMahon in the ring when she was Mr. McMahon's personal assistant. She didn't really do too much during that time in 2002. Now, when she moved to Raw in the latter part of mid part of 2002, I think one of her most famous storylines was her relationship with Test. She was kind of made his marketing agent, and it was kind of, she was the one that kind of made sure that Test should call his fans testicles, and she kind of made him cut his hair, reshape his image, and kind of do different things. Of course, Test would get into a program with Scott Steiner. They would kind of fight over Stacy Keibler during 2003, and just do different kind of things. They had a match for Stacy Keibler's services at Bad Blood, and another one at Unforgiven. They were doing different things, and they feuded from August until December on Monday Night Raw, and then it would kind of fade away. And again, Stacy Keibler was used in a way that, again, wasn't wrestling, but was an interesting part to make characters that were a little bit below the main event scene or the upper mid-cut scene and kind of give them something to do. Stacy was a great role in that and did that for many different people throughout her career. Now, while I said Stacy wasn't really a quote-unquote wrestler, she did wrestle, including a match at WrestleMania 20. Now, what I'm about to say might contradict this, but she did wrestle alongside fellow, I guess, non-Playboy cover athletes, Miss Jackie, and took on Playboy cover athletes Sable and Tori Wilson. They would wrestle in a tag team evening gown match at WrestleMania 20. MSG, Stacy Keibler, whether you want to hate on that or not, said she wrestled in a tag team match on WrestleMania in MSG. Okay? She got to wrestle in Madison Square Garden. Throughout 2004, Stacy would actually start wrestling even more. Now, she kind of did a lot of the 2004 Raw Diva Search things and was hosting that and doing different tag matches, working with Trish and Gail and Molly Holly, Nydia, Victoria, people like that. She actually got some upset victories over Stratus and Molly Holly and Gail Kim in the mid part of 2004. She actually did compete for the Women's Championship on October 11th, 2004. She was, of course, defeated by Trish Stratus. Keibler never won the Women's Championship. She competed in the first ever Fulfill Your Fantasy Divas Battle Royal at Taboo Tuesday. She was actually down to the final two, along with Trish Stratus, and doing different things in that time. Now, 2004 was really where she wrestled the most, or wrestled the most consistently, wrestling the likes of, like I said, Trish Stratus, who was arguably the number one WWE female superstar at that time, if not ever. But that was really Stacy's run with wrestling, and Stacy, again, was never a wrestler. It was never her number one attribute, but she did try, and she did get opportunities to shine with people who are much more experienced than her in the ring. In February of 2005, Stacy Keibler began appearing in backstage segments with then babyface Randy Orton. Now, she would eventually become his on-screen girlfriend. When kind of Orton went into a program with The Undertaker, I think one of the wilder moments in Raw's history, when you think about it in context, was actually Randy Orton ending the relationship by hitting Stacy Keibler with an RKO, incapacitating her. He kind of justified it and stuff like that, and obviously their relationship was over. It was brief, but I think a lot of people look back at it and they think it was much longer than just a month, but it was only a month of on-screen stuff between Stacy and Randy, and then of course the eventual RKO. She sold it like a champ, and again, someone who isn't a quote-unquote wrestler, doing stuff like that and just working with people and making them better around them, or making them just putting a lot of heat on Randy Orton. I hate to use business terms in something like this, but did use a lot of heat to get Randy Orton kind of back into a spot where he needed to be for The Undertaker. Now, in 2005 and going into 2006, Keibler would do her last real big thing in WWE, and that was, of course, joining forces with the Hurricane and Rosie. She became part of the trio. She was their superhero sidekick, and she was nicknamed Super Stacy. She had her own superhero costume, and she would be ringside and be kind of their manager. She would do a little bit of wrestling as Super Stacy. She was moved to SmackDown on August 25th, 2005. She would have some lingerie stuff, and she would kind of just, I guess, a way to put it this would be fizzle out of the WWE. She would actually ask for time off to appear on Dancing with the Stars, and eventually she would part ways with WWE in July of 2006. And that was the end of Stacy Keibler's time in WWE. Now, as someone who loves wrestling and someone who watches a lot of wrestling, when people retire and people go away, it usually means they're going to be back at some point. They're going to pop up somewhere. But Stacy Keibler is one of the only ones that has made very few appearances on WWE. Now, while never actually stepping foot on Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, or any WWE programming in front of a live crowd, she did appear for her first time on a WWE branded show in Tough Enough in 2011. She actually made the contestants compete in cheerleading stuff. Now, for the first time in front of fans with WWE, it was on the WWE 2019 Hall of Fame special when she kind of inducted, that's the word I was thinking of, inducted Tori Wilson into the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, while I think that some people may argue this, I actually think that Stacy Keibler is overdue for a run in the WWE Hall of Fame, and I think it will be just due time before she gets her own, and she can be known as a woman who made an impact outside of the ring when it comes to professional wrestling. That's going to do it for this week's episode of The Legacy Of. I hope you enjoyed everything that The Legacy Of has to offer. So far, we are halfway through season number 3. Of course, leave a like, share, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think about this season, this episode, everything about The Legacy Of, including, of course, Stacy Keibler. Now, next week, we're going to scream out loud because we're going back to WCW. We're going into TNA with the Scream Queen herself. We're looking at the legacy of Daphne. That's going to be a fun one. Make sure to follow me at JoshRobinson_00 pretty much across the board. Follow Love Wrestling at Love Wrestling CA pretty much across the board. And until next week, friends, I am out of here. Peace out.